How do I terminate a contract in Minnesota? My name is Andrew Ayers. I'm a business law and estate planning attorney with an office in Edina. Today we're going to talk about how do we terminate that contract. Now, when you enter into a contract, you're assuming that everything's going to work out just fine. You're going to hope there's no problems. Perhaps you're just purchasing a classic car and you're going to pay someone money, you get the car, and everything's fine. But in a lot of other situations, you're in a contract that may last a year, 2 years, or longer. Possibly it could be a lease for an apartment that you're not happy with anymore. And the question becomes, what do I do when I want to get out of that contract that I signed? So in Minnesota, there's 4 common ways I see that we can get out of contracts. And then there's also going to be some very specific situations where the state of Minnesota actually allows you what's called a cooling off period of 3 days if it's a certain type of contract. So if you're generally looking to terminate a contract, there's 4 main ways that I constantly see doing it. First way is with a breach of the contract. This breach means that somebody has not done what they're supposed to do under the contract. So for example, if you are purchasing 1,000 widgets from somebody for $10,000, if you don't pay the $10,000, you've breached that contract. Now, the contract may end. However, you're probably going to find yourself in some kind of a dispute, possibly in front of a court, for the payment of that $10,000 because the person who made the 1,000 widgets is going to want to be paid for making them. Second way you can terminate a contract is with just the conclusion of the contract. So if you're in a lease, let's say, that lasts for 1 year, at the end of 1 year, your contract is over. The contract should say what happens at the end of the lease, whether there's any money due, what has to happen next, do you have to vacate the premises. Now, when you're looking at the conclusion of a contract, it's very important that you read all of the contract and understand what the provisions say. So oftentimes in a lease, whether residential or commercial, it will say within 30 or 60 or 90 days of the end of the contract, at the end of the lease, is the lease automatically renewed? Does somebody have to say, no, I don't want the contract to be going forward? Or does somebody have to say, actually prospectively opt in and say, yes, I do want it to continue? So if you're going to rely on just the conclusion of a contract, it's very important to understand whether or not there's any kind of automatic renewal or what needs to be done to renew the contract to have it continue on. If both of you are not happy with the way the contract has been going, then the third way you can end a contract is by agreeing to it. So if you just haven't been happy, the supplier hasn't been happy, everyone's just unhappy with this contract, you can both agree that, you know what, we've had enough of this contract, we're going to move on and we're going to agree to end the contract. The final way you can terminate a contract, the fourth way, is if there's been a force majeure event. So back in the day, we used to have force majeure clauses that said a terroristic act or an act of God. In fact, it originally was just the act of God because we didn't have terrorism acts prior to 2001. So we've been slowly adding to the classifications of force majeure acts. And what these are significant events, for example, the recent pandemic, that inhibit your ability to perform under the contract. You can't fulfill your duties, so what are we going to do next? What happens under the contract? So it's important that you have a force majeure clause in your contract if this can be more than just a one-off kind of situation, if it's more than just buying a car. Let's say you're running a restaurant and you have a contract with your suppliers. Well, if it happens again where society is shut down and we have stay-at-home orders and nobody can go out to restaurants, you can't even bring in workers to your restaurant, what happens then? What's in your contracts with your suppliers? You don't want them delivering food day after day after day if you're not open and you can't even be open for takeout. So you want to make sure you have the right force majeure clause. As I said before, if you're in Minnesota, we actually have a special set of contracts that have a built-in 3-day cooling off period. Now, most of your contracts are not going to have this cooling off period, but if you fall into these categories, then there is a statutory 3-day cooling off period, meaning you have an automatic right. So if you sign the contract on Monday, you have 3 days to essentially reconsider and say, you know what, I don't want to enter into this contract. The state of Minnesota has a great website that lists out these various types of contracts. So for example, home solicitation sales, life insurance policies, hearing aids, extended car warranties, military personnel. If you're doing a debt settlement or a debt management services, foreclosure consultants, credit services, membership travel consultants, gyms, health clubs, social clubs, reverse mortgages, residential roofing and siding contracts, and agricultural contracts. Now, I didn't just know these off the top of my head. I can see them right here on my screen. There's a good Minnesota website that lists the various types of contracts that are subject to this 3-day cooling off period. So if you're worried about your contract and you just signed it, you can always go to the website and see in Minnesota if it's one of the contracts that has a built-in cooling off period. So if you're ready to terminate your contract, there's 2 ways you can try to do this. The first way is you can try to do it yourself. I've given you 4 different ways you can do it, and you can try to do those, or you can go to the Minnesota website and see if you qualify for a cooling off period. But as an attorney, you probably know that I'm going to recommend the second option, which is sit down with a professional, sit down with an attorney, go through that contract, see what it takes to actually terminate the contract. You may actually find that in order to terminate the contract, you may have an early termination penalty. There may be other fees involved that you weren't really sure about, and it may not make economic sense for you to terminate that contract early. But without speaking to a professional, you may not know all of your options. So your next steps are, if you're ready to get started, if you have a contract you want to terminate, you can reach out. You can go to my website, andrewmayers.com. There's a red legal strategy session button on the homepage. You'll be taken to my personal calendar. We can set up a legal strategy session. It's 15 or 20 minutes on the phone to discuss what's going on, what's in your contract, and give you some next steps and next options to move forward. If you need to terminate a contract, there's a variety of ways to do it, but you want to make sure you're doing it the right way.